So which armies and factions are going to be duking it out for the top spot in Games Workshop's World Champions of Warhammer? Let's take a look at the armies that the best players have the most faith will take them all the way. A few interesting examples of some counter-meta lists played by the best of the best. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking about Games Workshop's upcoming World Champions of Warhammer, where the players attending have submitted their lists. I thought it would be interesting to take a look over what a few people are using in this high-flying tournament. The World Champions of Warhammer is basically a Warhammer 40K tournament like no other. It's held in Atlanta in the USA. Games Workshop have done it over the past few years now, and the idea is that if you want to take part in it, you either have to win or place highly in a grand tournament somewhere around the world to get one of their golden tickets that allows you to take part in this event. It means it's not the single biggest Warhammer 40K singles tournament out there. There's plenty of other enormous ones, but what makes this one unusual is it's going to still be a very big tournament, and it's going to be made up of people around the world who know exactly what they're doing. As placing near the top of a grand tournament style event basically guarantees that all these players are good ones who know what they're doing and will be fighting with some pretty optimised army lists. The event itself is happening over the coming weekend. Games Workshop themselves will be streaming it on the day after their reveal show. I'm certainly going to be interested to see who winds up doing well in it. For this one though, let's take a look at the field, which factions are being taken here and which ones aren't being taken. It's likely to be quite different to normal tournaments given that you've got such a big population of players who are very good at the game. And for that info, we're taking a look at the list from Best Coast pairings, and a couple of people seem to have passed them and put the data into a bit more order. There's a 40K event tracker page and the big Reddit post on the 40K competitive Reddit. I'll leave all of those linked below in the video description if you'd like to check them out for yourselves. Let's talk through the armies and detachments being used, how they might differ from the field in a slightly more normal grand tournament, and looking on just a few examples of those army lists as we go along, played by some players who are particularly well known for winning grand tournaments on the regular. First up, we've got the factions that were being taken least to this event, and to be fair, not all that many armies really are unplayed here. Warhammer 40k at the moment feels about as well balanced as it's just about ever been, and as a result it seems there's only the one unplayed faction in Imperial Agents, most of the rest having a fair amount of representation, and a lot of division as to what people have chosen to take towards the top spots. Otherwise, looking through the least played armies though, there's only 4 Deathwatch armies here. They're lesser played normally of course, though it doesn't really look like they're being overrepresented here, despite their stats on the competitive scene really not looking too bad by the numbers for the small amount of people playing. It seems that people don't really have too much faith in chunky kill teams being the way forward against the best of the best. Otherwise, maybe not too surprised to see Thousand Sons and Grey Knights down here as well. Interesting that out of the Thousand Sons list, there's more people using the Rubrique Phalanx versus Grand Coven here. It seems the points changes for the Scarab Occult Terminators were enough to sway more people that way. It does seem that that's been doing better in recent times. The vast majority of the Grey Knights are going Warpbane Task Force, not really liking the Banishers or Brotherhood Strike. There's also 9 Emperor's Children here. 7 out of the 9 are Coterie of the Conceited, 2 being Brave Peerless Bladesmen, and we also have 9 for the Dark Angels as well. 5 of those being the Wrath of the Rock, and then 2 Gladius and 2 Stormlance. For Dark Angels, that does seem kind of notably low for them. They're a fair bit more popular in regular grand tournaments, though maybe a bit more limited on the top table success compared with some of them. It seems that John Lennon of the Art of War has gone with Emperor's Children to this one. It looks like it's slightly different to the usual take on these. I feel like I'm not really seeing quite so many people going 3 Winged Demon Princes, at least not since the nerf, though they certainly can move very fast and hit very hard with all of those mortal wound impact hits. Beyond that, there's also a Mauler Fiend for some muscle, 2 squads of Lord Exultant with Infractors for some big damage punches into the midfield, 2 sets of Tormentors for the objectives with sticky objectives and infiltrate, and then 3 sets of 6 Noise Marines, boosted by some Lord Cacophonists and loaded into a couple of Rhinos. Looks like Lucius the Eternal or the 3rd Lord Exultant squad didn't make the cut in this one though. I'm sure in the hands of an awesome player they're going to be a big threat, though for the average player the Emperor's Children do seem to have been a faction that have been performing a little bit on the lower side compared with most, slightly lower win rates and not quite so many top tournament performances compared with some. Before we move onwards and up the list, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor, In Titan's Terrain. They're one option to get a 40k battlefield on the go. They'll do things rather differently to most terrain sets out there, as they have a system of folding pop-up cardboard terrain. The idea behind their stuff is that you basically have 12 cardboard tiles all laid out in a 3x4 grid. That makes a 45 by 60 inch board the right size for 10th edition Warhammer 40k. And then when each of those tiles unfolds, up pops a building, so you basically have an entire battlefield that you can store completely flat and set up and take down relatively easily compared with most. The main unique selling point is just how small and portable it can be, fitting in a box set the same size as say a standard board game, so quite nice if you've got limited space to store at home or if you need to take it round to a friend's house or something. Coming pre-coloured with no hobby work needed is also one positive, and like most third party sets it's far cheaper than Games Workshop terrain. The folding cardboard design does have some trade-offs though. I'll talk through them briefly at the end of the video for those interested, though if you would like to take a look over their stuff, it'll be linked down in the video description. In any case, a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. Moving onwards and up the list, there's a vast amount of armies that have been selected a sort of medium amount of times, somewhere between 10 to 16 players of each faction. And again, I feel like this really highlights just how well Games Workshop's managed to balance the competitive end of Warhammer 40k right now. There are still some standout armies that people seem to have pivoted to, but most players are happy enough they're going to have their best chance with one of these factions. There's 10 players for the Space Wolves. Maybe one of the most interesting things there being that the Saga of the Beast Slayers just dropped off super hard in recent months. There's 7 Storm Lances going pretty heavy on the Thunderwolf Cavalry, and then 2 Gladius, and just the 1 Saga of the Beast Slayer repping the Codex. Kind of interesting to see just how badly that's done post the last update. It seemed to be doing okay in the numbers, at least initially when it came out, and it does have some powerful stratagems. There's 11 Tyranids players, which feels like it's low play rate for them. Again, their tournament performance numbers tend to be a bit on the low side relative to the rest of 40k, both in terms of win rates and in terms of top event placings. Interestingly though, there's quite a mix of detachments here: 4 Subterranean, 3 Vanguards, 2 Crusher and 2 Invasion fleets. There's 11 Adeptus Custodes, again notably lesser played here versus the general tournament field. They're kind of well known for not being quite as good at the absolute top table level versus 40k in general though it didn't stop Mr. Folgerpiles from winning this event with them last time around. They're almost all playing Lions of the Emperor. There's 12 Genestealer Occult players despite some slightly lackluster performance since they got their nerfs. There's 4 Host of Ascension, 4 Final Day, and then a good mix of others. I do feel like perhaps this sort of high skill floor and ceiling army that I wouldn't be too surprised to see a bit overrepresented here. For the Black Templars, there's 11 players, almost entirely Gladius, one with the Champions of Vehemence. For the Drukhari, there's 12 of them, with 11 Reaper's Wager and 1 Spectacle of Spite. Looks like fairly wholesale rejection of the Codex detachments there at top levels. And then one of the most interesting breakdowns was the Leagues of Votann, where more standard grand tournaments it generally tends to be Needguard that's the most popular, and then Bramfast Oathband have been the most popular initially after that. Here though, there's 4 players playing the Delve Assault shift and then 4 playing Halfband. Kind of interesting to see such a big shift there. The Halfband detachment has slowly been gaining more and more people playing it. So really interesting to see the Cthoanian Delve one doing quite so well here. For a look at a couple of these, here's Tim Schneider's list for the Leagues of Votann Delve Assault Shift. This one generally being kind of lesser played, though has had some tournament success before. It gives Cthoanian Beserkers Battle Line and the Deep Strike ability, and then has plenty of interesting ways to support them getting into combat and hitting quite hard when they get there. They've got access to advance and charge and return to reserves. You can have them re-rolling all wound rolls if you spend a command point and 2 yield points. And the enhancements here allow some healing of Berserk units, plus 1 to allow a first turn reserves arrival. For perhaps some more normal Votann staples, there's a Cabricus Carrier splitting a unit of Jaegirs for some infiltrating and skirmishing, 2 big Hexagon Land Fortresses that are always good for providing fire support, a Memnay Strategist that can farm up some yield points on the home field, and Uthar the Destined that can hand out some free stratagems there too. The rest is really quite different to most. A Brockhere Ironmaster bears that Delver Worker Navigator. I'm not sure if he'll be using low knot protection near the land fortresses or joining that small squad of Thunderkin to allow him to be exposed and also heal squads. There's 2 units of Cthoanian Earthshakers who have the ability to slow down units in this detachment, and also interestingly armed with the heavy damage dealer shells, so the Breacher Ordnance here. They'll be able to reroll hit rolls against objective markers with the Votann rule. Then for the Beserks themselves, there's 3 big units of 10, 1 with plasma axes and 2 with mauls, and then 2 smaller units of 5 as well. I guess at least some of them will be starting in the land fortresses, even if they do have the option to deep strike and maybe rapid ingress in. It's really cool to see something quite so different being used here. Otherwise for Drukhari, here we have Mr. Ridvan Martinez Archon Scari's list, and this one's going with Reaper's Wager, so re-rolls for the Drukhari units, and good stratagems to allow units to close to melee and hit harder when they get there. This one's got a vast amount of different unit options here. Some of the more interesting are a 10 squad of Mandrakes that could fade around the board and bring some big damage. He seems to have gone very heavy on the Reaver jet bikes, 1 big squad of 6 of them and then 2 smaller units of 3. A Scourge is jumpy around with the usual heavy weapon goodness. Lady Malice with her good debuff things, and I guess she'd be joining the unit of Incubi for a very hard hitting close combat squad. There's Lilith Hesperax with some witches, an Archon who I guess will be joining the Kabbalite warriors, and Harlequin Solitaire for a fighty lone operative that can move super fast as well. Certainly a whole ton of scary unit options here. It feels like the new Drukhari Codex hasn't initially had the best performance when it's been hitting the tournament scenes. There were lots of really quite interesting data sheets with their options available to them. I still certainly wouldn't be too surprised to see them do well at this sort of event. For a few more of the 40k armies that have been taken a sort of middling to upper middling number of times, we've got 12 players for the Guard, mostly Combined Arms and Hammer of the Emperor, though a few of the others, including Mr. Wesley St. Hines with his Recon Element one that won the Las Vegas Open. Chaos Demons were taken 13 times, mostly Incursion, though a few of the others as well. There's 13 Blood Angels, 10 Liberator, 3 Angelic Inheritors, maybe not too unexpected there. 13 Chaos Knight players, 12 taking Infernal Lance and making some very heavy use of the dual Gatling Despoilers. This one maybe feels just a little bit lower representation than they might be elsewhere. They have had some fairly good success on the top tables with those big Gatling Knights. There's 14 Orc players, 7 with Warhorde, 3 with Green Tide, and then a few of several others. Compared with in more normal Grand Tournaments, Sisters of Battle seem to be massively overrepresented here. 16 lists total, with 10 of them being Hallowed Martyrs, 3 Champions, 2 Bringers of Flame and 1 Army of Faith. They certainly seem like they've been one of the armies that have been punching above their weight in terms of win percentage and taking down a fair few events, so maybe not too surprising that there's more here than you didn't normally expect there to be. There's 16 Tau lists as well, again doing fairly well. 6 of those appear to be Montcar, though otherwise it's a pretty even split of most of the rest. And there's also 16 Chaos Marines as well. 6 of them Renegade Raiders, 4 of them Veterans of the Long War, 3 of them Creations of Bile, plus a few more besides. For a couple of examples of those, it looks like Innes Wilson, the top of the ITC rankings at the moment, is taking a Creations of Bile list into battle. These give the Chaos Marines some nice stats boosts from the core rule, plus access to advance and charge and fights on death, plus a few others. His list seems to go unusually heavy on the Chaos Rhinos, so lots of scary stuff jumping out of transports here. It seems there's Fabius Bile likely with that big unit of 10 chosen, a Chaos Lord maybe with some Legionaries for the rerolls perhaps. He takes prime test subjects, so is extra fighty there. And then also hanging out in those Rhinos, it looks like there's another 5 chosen, an Nemesis Claw Squad that can manipulate some stratagems, some more Legionaries, and then also 2 units of 6 Noise Marines on top of that. Interesting to see some heavy hitting firepower Aladdin from the Emperor's Children there. I guess potentially that could make the ballistic skill enhancement not terrible in this army if you happen to roll it up. Either way though, that's a lot of threat out of those transports, and they should be able to get into battle fairly safely from them. The Chosen are big and chunky and like those stats boosts rather well, both Bile himself and whatever else you happen to roll up. Then there's a massive unit of Warp Talons, they enjoy detachment buffs, and can hopefully pick off one unit, then rapid ingress, then pick off another if needed. And some objective and skirmishing support with Cypher as a punchy lone operative, some sticky objective cultists, and then a scouting beast of Nurgle and 3 Nurglings for infiltrate. Overall it looks like a pretty intimidating one all around. For the Sisters of Battle, there's this list by Jeffrey Kolodner, who appears to be top ranked in the ITC for Sisters prior to the World Championships. This one's going with Hallowed Martyrs, so the ability to revive characters on death, plus some really quite good stratagems for helping out in melee. Things like extra damage, fighting on death, and forcing the opponents to attack just one thing. As usual with these lists, they go very heavy on the characters that can be stood back up again if you'd like them to be. Morven Val leading the way with the enormous damage she can bring with some Paragon Warsuits, 2 10-strong Battle Sister squads with an Immolator to split one of them in half. There's a whole clutch of characters that could potentially join them or just run as nuisance interference ones alongside. Junith Arita, an Imagifier, a Palatine, and a Canoness with Blessed Blade, and Saintly Example to generate some Miracle Dice on death, though I suppose one of those is going to be joining the unit of Celestian Sacrosants with the Halberds, and most of them would seem at least fairly reasonable choices in their own way. There's a unit of Scouting Sanctifiers with their Hand Flamers and some Holy Fire, quite a fun one in a squad of 5 Zephyrim with a Jump Canoness with Through Suffering Strength. Quite cool to see a fighty Jump Canoness with the damage enhancement there. I feel like that's a fairly lesser taken one. 3 individual skirmishing Mortifiers with Buzzblades and Heavy Bolters, 2 Castigators to mark things for extra AP, and an allied Kalatus Assassin that can do some secondary objectives nice and easily. That certainly looks like it to be a difficult list to get to grips with a lot of threat that's likely going to be hiding or misdirecting you in melee when it gets there. Definitely looks like an army that's super player skill dependent. Here are the most played factions at the World Championships though. We have 19 Necrons players with a fairly even mix of Starshatter Arsenal and Awakened Dynasty, a few are taking Obeisance. I was perhaps kind of surprised to see quite so many Imperial Knights players here. Looks like there's 20 in total, 8 with Spearhead at Arms, 6 with Questoris Companions, and 6 with Valstrite Lance. I honestly would have guessed them to be a little bit lower represented, to be honest. Since the nerfs in their Codex release, they really haven't had a ton of top-level tournament success, but it looks like a lot of people are rating them as their best chance. Both Death Guard and World Eaters see lots of representation. They're the 3rd and 2nd most played armies in more general tournaments respectively. Though despite that, both of them don't really seem to have been taking quite as many tournaments top spots compared with some of their rivals. The majority for Death Guard go Virulent Vectorium, with a mix of a few of the rest beyond that. The World Eaters, as expected, mainly going Berserker Warband. Perhaps the most notably overrepresented out of anything though is a big 27 Adeptus Mechanicus armies, 18 of which are Halo Screed Battleclade and 9 are Skitarii Hunter cohorts. That's a pretty vast number relative to how many AdMech players there are out there. Even in more general grand tournaments where people often still like to skew towards the best thing, they remain only the 22nd most played faction there, so to have them 3rd here is a pretty big disparity. They are incredibly strong at the moment though, and by the numbers they do seem to have some of the most tried and tested tournament performance, both the best win rate in the game and the biggest amount of high placings at tournaments relative to the amount of people playing the faction. Then finally taking the top spots here we have the Space Marines, the most played army in the game in wider grand tournaments, 14 of those lists taking Shadowmark Talon, so around half of that being Raven Guard, which certainly feels pretty wild to see, and you wouldn't have expected that prior to the Aethon Sharn release. 9 are taking Gladius Task Force, and then the rest a good mix of a few of the other notable Marine ones. They might have lots of players, though Space Marines have still been doing massively great at winning events out there. No real surprise to see them doing so well. And then also even for number of play rates, we have the Aeldari. 31 players using those as well, 19 with Aspect Host, 8 with Warhost, plus a few others. For a few examples of these lists, it seems that Richard Siegler of the Art of War is running a Skitarii Hunter cohort AdMech list. Certainly feels like one of the on-paper ones to watch with such a good player who knows the faction so well when they're at the top of the game. Skitarii Hunter cohort gives some stealth buffs to Skitarii style units, and then a bunch of rather powerful stratagems with things like 5+ Feel No Pain, stopping you from shooting things, returning to reserve, and advance and charge. It looks like these stratagems plus the Cantic Thrallnet for some double doctriners. They're going to be applied to some fairly maximal 2-wound infantry units. This one almost feels like a bit of a reversion back to 9th edition AdMech with massive amounts of Sicarian spam backed up by Iron Striders. There's no less than 30 infiltrators with their big boosted stat line with their taser goads that are just very efficient units right now. 10 Rust Stalkers with their new damage 2 loadout, with their Razor and Cord Claw. They seem like a particularly nice units to use any advance and charge and damage stratagems on. For some very big board control, objective shenanigans and thinning out infantry, there's also 25 Taraxi Skystalkers, 2 units of 10 and 1 of 5, and then 2 sets of Skitarii Rangers, bringing the sticky objectives and some boosted doctriners to units nearby. One of those will be joined by the Cantic Thrallnet Marshal, which can double up on doctriners on one of the important units. There's Belisarius Core here, of course, for AdMech style over moments, and potentially other things if it makes sense to flex out to for a turn. And then while most of the rest of the list can handle infantry rather well, there's some heavy hitting Iron Strider spam backing it all up. No less than 9 of the Chicken Walkers, 3 units of 3, 2 squads with las cannons and 1 squad with auto cannons. I don't know if they might be thinking about using binaric offensive for some extra AP on those guns. Either way, their firepower is pretty ferocious right now between the Doctrina buffs, Call, and the big spam shots with Twin Links. It looks like an army that could do both big board control things and damage output rather well. For an interesting Death Guard example, here's a Tallyband Summoners list being played by Derek Apshe, who appears to be top-ranked ITC Death Guard player at the moment and has his 40K Dirtbags YouTube channel. Tallyband Summoners does seem to have been joining the mix for competitive Death Guard in recent times. It's the Allied Nurgle Demon one that gives you some more unit access and can buff Contagion ranges. For the enhancements used here, there's a damage 1 for +2 attacks to a Lord of Contagion, and the Lord of Virulence can threaten to land some demon units nearby. You can get them some very short range charges, and a few stratagems including allowing some full rerolls to hit if you're fighting alongside some Plague Legions, or one particular nice one to allow you to basically respawn an entire unit of Nurglings, which I guess will be aimed to be used on the big 6-strong squad. Feels like quite a lot of the value comes from the other datasheet options though. In his list it looks like the Lord of Virulence can deliver some demons and spot for some bloat drones with heavy blight launchers. It looks like there's some Plague Marines with a couple of malignant Plague casters that can jump out of a Rhino and hit hard between their damage output and their psychic shooting. There's 2 sets of Death Shroud Terminators, able to get the jump on the enemy at close range. I'm not sure if the Lord of Virulence might attach to the second one, but the Lord of Contagion definitely would. Some Skirmishing Chaos Spawn, Poxwalkers, and a Plague Spitter Bloat Drone. And then for the demons, we've got one great big melee threat in Rotigus himself. He might be a nice one for the 6-inch charge, I suppose. 2 sets of Plague Bearers with their sticky objectives, another set of 3 Nurglings, and a Scout and Nuisance Beast of Nurgle. Feels like a list going very heavy on the board control style things. There's still plenty of room for a few big hitting damage dealers. Then finally for a list to take a look at, here is an Aeldari Warhost by Folder Piles, last year's winner of the World Champions event, and he basically seems to have been doing well in a bunch of big events with Aeldari over the past year, and this list being for the most part a fairly good example of standard Aeldari Craft World lists at the moment, though with a few twists that not everyone takes. There are the usual collection of Phoenix Lords, Fugun with a big unit of Fire Dragons, allowing you to jump in and out of a Wave Serpent and demolish things while staying safe. Lycus to jump up the board with some Warp Spiders, though interestingly enough her squad seems to be taking the Death Weavers and Spinneret in support rather than the Power Blade array one. And Jane Czar's here to rush up with some Howling Banshees. A bit more unusually, there's Morgan Ra with a small squad of Dark Reapers. Looks like they might be getting about using that Falcon Grav tank. They'll be pretty solid at dealing with some elite infantry at fairly long range. Eldrad Ultron can stand by himself farming up some command points, and then there's lots of small unit support for objectives, 2 sets of Infiltrating Rangers, 2 units of expendable Corsair Void Reavers, 2 more squads of long jumping Warp Spiders, and then 3 small squads of swooping Hawks, the Spiders and Hawks in particular being nice enough at shredding some lighter infantry as well as doing objective things. Interesting to see the differences that the absolute top level of the game seems to be playing versus the rest of the field. I did think it was kind of cool to see some lists that are really quite different to the standard. Interesting to see a few of the top players taking things like Tallyband Death Guard, pretty maximal 2 wound and mech spam, Noise Marines in creations of Bile, and the Space Dwarves going for some different attachments there. Let me know your thoughts on any of the army lists down in the comments below. I'll certainly be interested in checking in on what rises to the top out of these. Feel free to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to check in on that. That's about it for this one, though before I go, I'll just give a quick shout out to Titans Terrain, the video sponsor, and briefly talk through some examples there, some pros, cons and different examples of their folding cardboard terrain set. As mentioned, I'd say this one is a terrain set that's got a few more obvious pros and cons compared with most. The biggest advantages are that you can store it completely flat, so it's super easy to transport in a box set the same size as a normal board game. There's pretty much no other terrain sets that can be packed away this small this easily, and that is really quite a big selling point to a lot of people out there. Otherwise, like most third-party terrain sets, it's far cheaper than a whole board of Games Workshop terrain, and at least somewhat comparable to MDF, and it doesn't need any painting or assembly. Being ready to go immediately straight out of the box is handy enough for people who don't have loads of time for hobbying up their own terrain sets. For some potential downsides of it, it's a bit less sturdy and hard wearing versus plastic or MDF given it's cardboard and designed to fold flat. Being foldable cardboard means that you can't really put models in the top floor so well as well, they don't bear loads of weight. And otherwise the grid layout can mean that you have a bit less flexibility than with some terrain sets. You can gain a bit of versatility from rotating the tiles or arrange them in different ways, so it might not be the worst to have say an extra room wall or two just to break up a couple of firing lanes out of them. It doesn't exactly do tournament approved terrain or anything like that, though I've had pretty good anecdotes that it works rather well for casual games of 40k. For their specific designs of it, they've got a few different ones. A Forgotten Furnace one that's got a bunch of glowing runes and burnt out factories and things, all very Chaos Foundry looking there. And then a more standard Shattered Hive style one, a more classic looking Ruined City type vibe with some bombed out buildings and armoured containers. Each of those also have an expansion centerpiece set as well, an optional add-on for a great big centerpiece in the middle of them. You get a cathedral style thing for the city, or an infernal spire for the foundry, basically made out of 2 tiles being pushed together. If you'd like to check them out, there'll be links down in the video description, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. In any case, that's just about it for this one. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can support there if you'd like to. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.